Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here with Matt Sturtevant and Timothy Bonner, authors of a book titled From Distrust to Trust, Controversies and Conversations in Faith Communities, published by Judson Press. Matthew is one of the pastors of the First Baptist Church of Lawrence, Kansas. He has conducted ministry in Baptist churches in Kentucky and Kansas since 1998 and received his master's of divinity at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, completed a clinical pastoral education residency in South Carolina, and received his doctor of ministry and preaching at Chicago Theological Seminary. Matt has served in leadership roles with the Ministers' Council of the Central Region, helping to support fellow ministers across Kansas, and until the beginning of 2025, served in a similar way supporting fellow ministers across the nation as president of the ABC USA Ministers' Council. Timothy is a licensed clinical psychotherapist in Lawrence, Kansas. After over 3 decades as a psychotherapist in community mental health centers, he completed his study for a dissertation at Central Theological Seminary in Shawnee, Kansas, where he received a Doctor of Ministry degree in May 2020. Tim has given many professional presentations on psychotherapy, communication, and parenting. Highlights include parenting in the 21st century at the Satira World Conference in Hong Kong. At some point, we'll have to talk about Hong Kong. That's like one of my favorite cities. He's also presented holistic therapy for anxiety, depression, and codependence, and other continuing education presentations. You can learn more at the website distrusttotrust.com. That's distrust, the number 2, trust.com, and also, of course, at judsonpress.com. So, guys, congratulations on this wonderful work, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, what else would you like folks to know about you?
I guess I'll jump in. Despite being a white male professional who is privileged, I come from a diverse background. I grew up on a cattle ranch in southeast Kansas and had a wide variety of jobs before becoming a psychotherapist. One was cowboy. Then I was construction laborer. I was also a sheriff's dispatcher and jail keeper, a research assistant, graduate school, became a university instructor, and after that, child protection services social worker. And then I decided I wanted to become a therapist, so went back to graduate school. I also have visited 37 different countries, and I'm in a diverse, blended, mixed family with 6 adult children and 15 grandchildren that are a mixture of European, African, Mexican, and indigenous descent.
Wow. Well, good for you. That's got to keep you busy. 15.
Yes, it does.
That has to keep you busy.
Yep.
Well, and I don't have quite the same vocational adventure story that Tim has. I grew up as a preacher's kid in small towns in the Midwest and the Mid-South, and my dad was a pastor. I thought I'd never be a pastor, and next year will be my 25th year of ministry. So that's kind of how it often happens. My wife and I are as of last night, we are parents of now 2 high school graduates. Our second our second child, graduated from high school last night. My wife is in many ways my hero. She teaches elementary school at a public school here in town, and loves to teach kids how to read. So that's the family stuff. I just love to be outside. I've got a window right next to me, so if I'm peeking outside during the interview, I'm looking at the green. I love to be hiking or trail running or in the backyard somewhere, and or watching a baseball game somewhere outside. So those are some of my ways of being.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, I have a particular interest in your book. The title again is From Distrust to Trust, Controversies and Conversations in Faith Communities. What led you guys to write that book?
Well, there's a story about our dialogue, but I think I'll start first with saying that there is pervasive insecurity and distrust in the world today. 2 generations ago, 1960s, surveys recorded that 60% of the U.S. population trusted their neighbors.
Hmm.
Most recent surveys asking the same question, it's 30%
Wow.
of Americans trust their neighbors. And that's overall. For millennials and Gen Z cohort, it's 19%. So
Wow.
there is need there. And I'll let Matt talk about our process of decision making.
Yeah, we were both in seminary in two different seminaries working on doctoral degrees. So we had this kind of thought process along similar lines. We were both thinking about kind of the case study and this kind of trust question was how churches talk about same-sex marriage. And so Tim did a ton of research with different churches who, had different processes or different conversations around this. I was getting a demon in preaching, and so mine was more about how do you preach through a conversation like this. And so, we knew of each other's projects. We kind of talked back and forth a little bit of it. This is like during COVID, so we were at car church one day. So we were outside, and Tim was greeting people, waving on the way in, and we were talking about it. And we had thought about could we do an article together? Could we do something? And I think it was Tim that just said, well, why don't we just shoot the moon and do a book, right? Because we do. We think that this trust. Issue becomes an issue in the church, and it becomes an issue in the community because we see that the church isn't doing this too well. One of the words that we both learned in the process is a term, alterity, what we define as openness to otherness in the book.
Hmm.
And this idea simply being we're just not used to trusting the other, right? We're not used to trusting somebody different than us, somebody who looks different or acts different or has a different ideology. And so we want to say, let's pay attention to this, right? It's important to the church's history. It's important to the church's future survival. One of the things that we did in the book was realize, we have two perspectives, but, other churches and other leaders who have been through this process have other perspectives. So we have a chapter in the book, Other Voices, written by participants of our research, right? So we have um, diverse voices that kind of help us round out some of what we suggest is important. They have some other ideas about that as well. So that openness to otherness, I think, is pretty significant piece of kind of what kicked off the whole thing.
Hmm.
If I can add just one thing is that of those other voices, 5 were females and only 1 male. So they gave us a little variance in the perspective in the book.
Good, good. So who do you think the book is most intended for?
Well, it's an easy read for anyone interested in trust building in their community, dealing with divisive issues and controversial topics. The content is applicable to all organizations and guidelines, not really limited to Christianity, even though that is the focus as a Christian book. I think anyone interested in insights or wisdom about leadership, communication in general, or conflict transformation in particular, in the decision making, a healthy decision making process to get to a positive outcome would be interested in the book and find it useful.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would add to that, basically anyone who loves and care about Jesus's church, right? I mean, I think that, Ryan, you've done some of this work, right? You've seen that the church is both a symptom of this diminishment of trust, that folks are, moving away from churches where they feel like they don't want to be around those neighbors that they don't trust in the same way. So it's a symptom, but it's also, I think, we think part of the antidote for healing, right? These healthy um, Alterity-driven churches, openness to otherness churches. We call it elastic church, right? A church that's willing to stretch a little bit, willing to open to say, well, how are you, and how could you help us be who we're becoming? I think that elastic church idea is a catalyst to how we see Jesus healing the world, right? It's early in the book we talk about kind of some keys to trust assessment, because I think, most churches would say, oh, yeah, we trust each other, right? But then when they actually start looking at it, oh, well, there's a lot more to it than we thought. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's probably, that antidote is probably more congregational than it is national or international. I think that the bigger it is, the more triangles you're talking about. We quote Nancy Ammerman, who talks about kind of a de facto congregationalism, that whatever your church can decide together, your church is going to argue about, right? Nancy doesn't quite say it that way, but she says that we are kind of, even if we're more of a top-down polity or more of a hierarchical, it doesn't necessarily matter. We can make decisions, and we will make decisions as a congregation. So how do we do that, right? Do we do it in a way that is trust building, or a way that shows distrust?
Hmm. Hmm. Very good. So I'd like to read from one of the endorsements from the book. This is from Dr. C. Jeff Woods, former General Secretary of the American Baptist Churches USA. He says, for congregations ready to tackle controversial issues, the authors provide research, examples, and models to engage in this process. So it sounds as though the book is pretty practical and kind of hands-on. Is that what you were striving for?
Yes. Pragmatic application is what it is all about. And it is about relationships because invariably it is people doing the work of the church. We expect that, so any leaders, lay or ordained, can find it useful. We include what we call a toolbox approach. One being pathways, using our case examples, pathways to trust. And then another way, it's kind of founded on the tools, is a cycle of building trust and the different steps in it. And then a third part it includes a covenant for communication that people can use as guidelines to try to discuss together how to relate to one another. How do we get along, especially when there is conflict or distrust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can hear some of Tim's many years of therapy background, right? I mean, he knows, and he brings, I think, to the book some incredible tools for how do we engage with each other? How do we communicate with each other? How do we have empathy for one another? How do we trust the other in this way? Yeah, I think that practical hands-on stuff can be really helpful. First choice would be, sitting with Tim in therapy. Second choice would be reading a book from Tim, right? In terms of how do we do some of that stuff? Because I think some of that is really important. And some of those tools the church just isn't used to doing well. And so learning from somebody who's done that for years is I think a helpful piece. Even if the book is just a starting point for folks to maybe a leadership team of a church, or a Sunday school class of a church, or somebody who wants to get together and say, wow, we could really do this a little bit differently, couldn't we? Well, and then the other practical piece that's helpful, perhaps to some, not to all your listeners, but to some, would be the stuff about preaching. I really feel like the work of preaching does a lot to diminish that trust or evoke trust. I think what we do in the pulpit is an important work. And I say in the pulpit, let me just say with the preaching work altogether. One of the things we talk about in the book is that preaching doesn't start with me in my office and I'll get all the right answers and I'll deliver them to you, right? But I think to evoke that trust, it's how do I, like Tim said, how do I come out of a relationship angle? How do I listen to what folks are saying about this text and what folks are saying about my sermon that I preached about the text. We talk about a model we do in our church called the two-way, which is a conversation that we have every week about what do you think about the sermon? You know, how could you make it better? What could be different about it? And then, you know, let's open up this book of the Bible together and imagine and question and talk about it. And so we have this kind of cycle of this is how we preach together.
And it is an open group. Anyone can participate face
Mhm.
to face or remotely.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
great.
and so yeah, the quote that I used that we used in the book we reference from Wesley Allen is the homiletic of all believers, just like the
Mhm.
priesthood of all believers, right? We're doing this homiletics work together, and so yeah, I think that's another practical. So you know, how do you craft a sermon? How do you form a sermon based on evoking trust? How do you engage with other folks around creating that sermon? So. Again, that won't be for everybody, but for those who are looking for some of that work, it's in there too.
Cool. So the book's description says, we believe that with connected, interactive preaching and intentional collaborative work, congregations can not only continue but also grow into institutions of social power and justice based on Jesus' prototype of servant leadership. So, I realize every church is different, but what would a church look like, in your view, that has turned into an institution of social power and justice?
Mhm.
Well, as you referenced there, the servant leadership role model that Jesus provides is recorded in the Gospels, is kind of our starting point and foundation because he was dealing with conflict and speaking truth to powers in a very unusual way. And, it's a challenge for all of us to follow that. We included many metaphors in the book because I think that's one way that people can kind of understand it or see it, the message the best. One of them is the elastic church. That's kind of the overall theme of the book. In fact, a process model of ongoing dialogue, as Matt mentioned with the sermons, of communicating with each other and getting to know each other. In an elastic church, um, they really are intentional about how they communicate, how they relate, how they reach out to others, how inclusive, open, welcoming, affirming they are. In the elastic church metaphor, kind of gives that image of growth. It has room to expand. So that's kind of the challenge we put forth for any church or church leaders to really work at their expansion.
Yeah, like Tim said, I think that the metaphors are helpful for folks to imagine what that might look like. We talk about a binary star church. We talk about a sandpaper church, the church of the airplane seat, the church of the middle rings of Saturn, right? Well, we use the language that's a bit overused now, but the language of purple church. But the way we use that or work to use that is that it's not like we're going to be at a church where all of us are just the exact same, melded color of purple across the board, right? But we point to the metaphor of the one of the paintings from the pointillist era, right, where there's all of these different like pieces, and you probably have some blues and some reds and some purples and some different colors. But then when you pull back, you realize, oh, okay, that this is where the purple comes from. It's not that we're all the same blob, but that each of us can kind of retain some of our own individuality, our own ideology, and yet do it together in a way that we say, yeah, we can stay together, that if we were just this one, blue dot far away from everything, we wouldn't meld in the same way. So yeah, I mean, I think those metaphors kind of help say, hey, how can we create justice? How can we create, like you say, Tim, a move toward power in kind of empowering those voices on the margins? Or the parade. Tim, talk about the parade metaphor a little bit. That's one. It's not in the book, but the
Yeah.
idea is that we kind of generate our own metaphors, and this continues.
Yeah, we really like the parade metaphor because it is inclusive. In the parade, each position is represented with a float or a marching group, and they're able to hold on to their identity as they march through, move through the parade, and everyone can see it, but they are all part of the same parade. So that's what we like about it is the inclusivity of that metaphor.
That's good. That's good.
Mhm.
So the publisher also describes the book as a deep dive into how churches navigate politically divisive issues. So I have an interest in this area, and my perception is that churches often want to avoid politically divisive issues. Can you summarize how that can be overcome?
With a lot of work. Uh, we, of course, put a lot of work into uh, trying to communicate that with people. Of course, the overriding fact is that trust must be earned, and it can be lost in a nanosecond. So it's a delicate subject, but as we've talked about, it's better to address conflict issues, discontent directly than to try to avoid it or act like it's not there and keep your Sunday smile on. Uh, the model we came up with is a cycle of building trust, the cycle indicating that it is an ongoing process and you don't ever really arrive at a point of, oh, okay, we've done it, we're done, next task. But it starts with humility. And that's really on the individual as well as a group level of that servant leadership that we talked about, Jesus modeling, uh, seeing each person as an equal, just as good as, no better than any other person. And really that's a foundation that's necessary for the open, honest, direct communication required for building trust. The next step is hospitality. That's the connecting with the other. That's being open to engaging with another who may obviously has some differences, may have drastic differences from me as an individual or even our church group as a whole. And once we can do that, and it's part of the outreach, part of the welcoming, then we really move into the relationality part of the cycle. And I think the best synonym for relationality is really friendship and working together. And that's kind of, able to not only be together, but to be together as friends and co-workers in doing the work of the church together. And then the final step in the cycle, we call intersectionality. It's kind of a new concept that we use, and it's kind of challenging, but really see intersectionality as understanding and accept each person for who they really are, genuinely, openly, honestly, in being able to work together with them. Matt, can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we understand that that's some of the hurdles, right? As soon as we say, oh, here's this great, easy thing to do, then it's like, oh, yeah, but there's sexism in the world. There's racism in the world. There's all these challenges, and it's not just that we could just address it, as one big block, right? Instead, this one person is at the intersection of all these different things. And so how do we address those challenges when when folks, are working against some of those uphill climbs, and are again on the margins in multiple ways, how do we then begin to say this is more than just, pie in the sky, okay, let's trust each other better, but say, no, I can't trust you because I've been burned by this, right? And so how do we move past some of that and build through one another? So yeah, I think, and then the cycle comes back again to humility, right? So it's a circle, and so it becomes a way to say each of these points along the way, we're starting to learn from each other. And I mean, the bottom line is, these are Jesus principles, right? How is Jesus teaching us how to be, more connected to one another? The metaphor that, it seems a little too obvious, but is maybe the most important one is the body of Christ. That this is body of Christ stuff, that, as we read in the New Testament, they didn't agree either, right? They were dealing with challenges. They were dealing with some pretty significant distrust of one another, and yet they made it work.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so
Well,
we advocate transparency, honest communication, empathetic listening, and really interacting with respect for all at all times.
mhm, I mean, over the years, personally, I've come to increasingly learn the importance of the power of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I was really glad to see the title of your book, about distrust. And I have been a big fan of a business book that was written several years ago called The Speed of Trust, which, even though it's a business book, it's really pretty widely applicable, well beyond just, the effectiveness of a business. And in your book, you've got a title you've got a chapter that is titled Examples of Congregations Processes, Three Pathways to Trust. So can you describe, one of those examples, one of those pathways?
Yeah, one of the things that again came out a lot of Tim's research, well, on both of us. I mean, we talked to a lot of pastors, a lot of leaders, a lot of moderators, a lot of folks from different churches. And again, this is back to now we're talking about specifically this case study of how do churches talk about same-sex marriage? After Obergefell versus Hodges, what do we do now? And so a lot of churches have tried to figure this out. Some in maybe we'll just say in different ways, right? And so what we tried to do instead of saying, well, here's our one size fits all way to do this, we said, there's kind of multiple pathways to get to trust, and this is again at the congregational level, at the process level, in terms of what process will your congregation create to be able to talk about this issue, or fill in the blank, whatever the issue that threatens to divide in your congregation, in your context. How will you start to kind of do that? Because we didn't want to say, again, there's this is the one thing that works for everybody, because it doesn't. I mean, different churches have different ways of getting there. So the pathways metaphor is simply to say, there's more than one way to get to where you're headed, which is, healthy communication, healthy work together. So I'm going to let Tim kind of clarify what some of those what we did was we took all this information from all these different churches and said, what if we created three not real churches, but kind of churches modeled after what we heard. And so here's one pathway, here's another pathway, here's another pathway. So Tim,
Okay.
talk a little bit about what we came up with.
So we'll give you all three sort of for comparison basis. One was ongoing, non-confrontational, pragmatic approach. It actively was being inclusive of diverse participants while not being too bold in proclaiming or advocating a certain position. So they were walking the tightrope of inclusion, but also not offending longstanding members who may have been resistant to change, more so. And then it was clergy-led, clergy were primarily making decisions all along and providing, I guess, leadership and education to the congregation, but not really pressing the issue. For example, not calling for a congregational vote. And in that process, the churches we looked at, it was, as I said, ongoing. And so they didn't lose any members, even though they were bringing in diverse people into the group. And so actually that's kind of representative of more diverse congregations. Second prototype is, we call it a unified path toward consensus. And it was lay-led, and the clergy took the position of advocating community development, community building, and promoting very actively that and every voice must be heard atmosphere, and meetings, different educational presentations, trying to really be inclusive of various opinions. And in the end, they agreed upon accepting same-gender marriages in their church by their pastor. And they were also reticent to go too far with it, so they defined themselves as welcoming and inclusive, which of course left out the affirming of alternate sexual orientations or lifestyles. And again, they reported they had not had any loss of membership or change in their congregation as a result of that process, which had gone on for over a year. A third example was one of policy clarification decision-making process, where the church set out on an extended, intentional process of learning that explored both sides. And part of their intentionality was maintaining lay leadership throughout this whole process. So an interesting difference there. They also had public discussions, educational presentations, again, trying to cover both sides. And after a years-long process, over 2 years, they actually had a vote. And even though the majority approved having same-gender marriages in their church by their pastors, they had a loss of membership in their congregation around 20%. Who did not agree with the vote and of course voted differently. So those are the three models that we explain in detail in the book. And other churches that deviated from these specific models, we would include those as comments of just things that we know some churches did otherwise.
So yeah, the goal is to kind of say, all right, there's not one way to do this. Each way is going to have some advantages. Each way is going to have some disadvantages. And so you kind of have to find your own path. But here's some ways that we, again, kind of suggest might be a process, a possibility.
Learning from others' work, yes.
Sure, of course. Yeah. So, in addition to the book, do you guys do consulting services with churches to help them through this different variety of processes?
We would be glad to do that.
We have not yet. I think that's one thing that we have always thought in the back of our minds that would be kind of the logical next step, just because I think it would be, because again, every church has a different context on this, and we could bring some of these pieces. But that's a different, that would be hanging our shingle a little bit differently and kind of putting that offer on the table. But you're more than willing, formally or informally, if somebody wants to start a conversation about that. I think it is, again, kind of a next step down the road.
They can contact us by going to our website, distrust.com.
Sure. Okay. So what would you most want readers to take away from the book?
I'd say, well, here, you take the first shot at this one, but Tim.
Okay. Well, we think really that the church is the ideal trust building facilitation tool for communities. Uh, I think that's largely underutilized, by the way, but we encourage church leaders to really uh, kind of reevaluate where they are in this process of trust building and what are their challenges that they have going, and could do they need to, or could they kind of maybe move forward and work on expansion by putting effort into uh, being more intentional about building trust and not just relying on kind of the same old and the same people and all. So really kind of using it as an outreach tool, I think would be one way that can be wisely used. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, Brian, you've done some of this too, right? I mean, you contextualizing how we heal our divides is pretty important right now. I think we need to see some real life examples, and
Yes.
again, ours are kind of, blurred a little, but I do think that this comes from real life conversations with folks to say, yeah, we wanted to do this, but it was hard, and we lost some folks, or yeah, we wanted to do this, but as soon as we brought it up, they said, let's not do this at all, right? And so how do we move in that direction? And I think it's helpful. I mean, I can imagine somebody picking up a book like this if they're in the middle of something like this to get some direction. But I would also suggest you don't start putting wood over the windows in the middle of the hurricane, right? I mean, I think if you're not building trust now, then you're not going to be able to do it in the middle of a controversial conversation that the whole church is having together, right? So I think, again, starting to build some of this trust through, again, these kind of practical tools, whether it's preaching or whether it's just kind of a trust assessment or whether it's again, some of those tools that Tim brings to the table as a therapist, an expert on communication. Again, if you're because I think we're all going to get there at one point, and churches that are more ready for it, right? At least have the lumber sitting there so you can be ready to do that work together. Um, I think that's got to be a piece of it is folks
Mhm.
thinking about
I'd
trust.
want them to really uh, either kind of bolster their confidence or
Mhm.
develop their confidence in their ability to deal with divisive issues, hot topics,
Right.
conflict within their congregation.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that, yeah, that's important, right? Because I think a lot of folks say, well, we can't do this because X, right? We'll lose people, or it's too scary, or I don't want to, or it's hard, or whatever. This is at least a way to say, maybe we can do this, right? Maybe we can start doing this. And again, it could be the thing where a leadership team says, let's consider what this might look like before they jump in with both feet.
Well, back to your hurricane analogy, one of my favorite book titles was Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Same point, right?
Uh,
I think that's it. I think we're gonna need to do this at some point, but let's just wait and see what happens, right? It's like, no, that you're not gonna drink anything if that's
Don't
the
put it
case.
off.
Then
yeah.
don't put it off, right? Yeah, yeah.
Well, and I say in the book that if, and I think, you know, professionals, leaders probably know themselves well enough to know whether they're good at communication and dealing with conflict or not. And so we say that if you are not confident in your abilities, consult, get someone to come in
Yeah,
and help you with that. I mean,
absolutely.
and we can all benefit from that, but don't let that be a barrier to you going forward with it.
Mhm.
So, I know you guys produced this great book, but I have to ask, are there any future books that you guys have in mind or other kinds of projects?
We have talked, but
Right.
at this point,
Yeah.
it's just been talk as far as a specific book. We've actually also had suggestions on what we should do. Um, the kind of we aren't working on a particular project at this time, but I will interject here that I do write a blog, and it's Timothy Bonner 9, the number 9 .medium.com.
Hmm.
So Medium is it's not behind a paywall, so anyone can read up to 3 articles per month. And I don't write more than 3 articles per month, so they can keep up with it, or they can read, of course, any article on Medium for $5 a month. Yeah.
Well, and I'll say, Brian, my next project is Sunday sermon. I gotta figure that one out. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but at the same point, the text is about Peter and Paul, arguing in Antioch, and so I think it is a chance to say as we have these conversations around our scriptural story, we realize it's there, right? It's already there. We don't need to make up controversy. We don't need to make up. The church has dealt with this. God's people have dealt with this from the beginning. And so, yeah, our other projects are like, well, how do we bring this to a different aspect, right? Again, whether it's consulting or whether it's, something that we can like a workbook that you can do on your own or whatever the
Yeah, yeah.
possibilities might be. Yeah.
Good.
We'd love to, but we're not there yet.
Well, it's, as you said, a cycle, a continuing, right, issue that's not going to go away anytime soon. And so, having a continued set of efforts over time that maybe take different forms and shapes is, I think, probably a pretty good way to go about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, congratulations, guys, on all of your work. Best wishes going forward. Again, the title of the book is From Distrust to Trust, Controversies and Conversations in Faith Communities. And check out the website distrust2trust.com and, of course, judsonpress.com. So, guys, appreciate your work. Appreciate you spending some time with us. And thanks so
Thanks, man.
much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Brian.
Brian.